In this video, I will demonstrate the steps needed to input a supplier invoice associated with a purchase order into Workday. In order to pay a supplier invoice related to goods or services for which you had a purchase order, you have to link the invoice to the original purchase order. Type Find Department Purchase Order in the search bar. There are many different ways to search for purchase orders. You can search by a cost center hierarchy, or you could input a gift, grant, or project. Once you are comfortable with your search parameters, click OK. Your search results will be a list of all outstanding purchase orders that meet your search criteria. Now that you have found your purchase order, the next step in the process depends on whether your purchase order was for goods or for services. If your purchase order is for goods, then you must record receiving in Workday before you can pay the invoice. If your purchase order is for services, then you can move on to the next step, which is create supplier invoice. From the related action next to the purchase order number, you can now go to Supplier Invoice and then Create. This form is where you start to input the information off the physical invoice that you have received from the supplier. The company and supplier will auto-populate from the purchase order. The invoice date should be the date listed on the supplier invoice. This is the date that drives the timing of when we pay the supplier. Payment terms have been negotiated with each supplier and are built into the supplier profile and should default. The ship to address will default as Simmons. Handling code is where you can request that AP hold the check for pickup if needed. Otherwise, this field should be left blank. The supplier reference number is required and should include the invoice number off the supplier invoice. At the bottom of the form, you will see a tab that says Invoice Lines. These lines will pull in from the purchase order that you previously created. Double check that all accounting is correct. Ensure that the amount invoiced agrees with your supplier invoice. Note that if you change the accounting or increase the dollar value at this time, the invoice will go through an approval process. If the supplier invoice includes prepaid services, please check the prepaid box. Select Prepaid Expense under Additional Work Tags, and then complete the Prepaid Detail tab. You will be required to attach supporting documentation in the system for this supplier invoice. In most cases, this will be an invoice received from the supplier and other documentation supporting the amount to be paid. Please do not attach statements as we will require the invoice. Click Submit. At this point, your supplier invoice will be routed through the approval process and will be paid based on the terms established with this supplier.